Hi everyone. My name is Bill Masoulis, for those of you who don't know me. Together with Chris Luscri, we run the program here at the cinema called Unknown Pleasures. And I'd like to thank you for coming, and thanks to the cinema also for allowing us to program these kind of alternative films. And a big thank you to all the traditional owners of the land for allowing us to live, work and play here after 250 years of abuse. But, my respects to the elders, to the Indigenous elders of the Kulin Nation, and my love and solidarity with all Aboriginal people in Australia. This is a really, it's a treat putting this screening on because, you know, a visiting filmmaker, someone from the States, even though he was here in Melbourne for 20 odd years in the 80s, 90s and into the 2000s, but to grab him like this, even if it's over the, you know, Christmas, New Year holidays, is just a really good opportunity. And so thanks to Dirk de Bruyn, who's here, who did the programming of this session. He's very familiar with David Cox's work. And we will have a Q&A at the end, so stick around. And I won't say anything about the program. Dirk?
Okay. Thank you, Bill. It is a pleasure, and it's really, even though, you know, you might say that I programmed, it's really just a matter of talking to David and letting it all spurt out, and which is just a question of putting in the order that it was made. And the other thing is, there are some gaps in it, and during those gaps, David is going to annotate the screening, so there's going to be a kind of liveliness to the whole thing, and his personality, which can be, you know, quite disruptive in the most positive way. You know, he is a survivor of the 80s, and that's one of the reasons we're here to kind of celebrate this.
3D glasses.
That's right. So that's for about 2/3 of the way through the program. There's a film that we're going to use for that, and I guess David will cue us when that happens. And then when the whole thing's finished, I'll ask a few more questions, and then we'll, you know, go up to the audience and ask a few things as well. One little thing that I could say, I mean, this is kind of like a journey through a whole lot of different technology and technological change, and David's personality, how he's kind of interacted with those changes, and also how, you know, one of the things that I get out of it is the fact that there's a personality, mischievous kind of creative personality at the heart of it, which keeps on reinventing itself and surviving. I think he is a survivor in so many creative ways. For some reason this morning I thought about Corin Cantrell's film In This Life's Body, which was originally called Journey Through a Face. And I think what we can say about this work, and that it's, you know, it's about a journey through technology, through different phases of technology that we've all lived through and tried to deal with, and this is how David dealt with it. So thank you. David, do you want to say anything?
Oh yeah, sure. And when you're ready, first of all, I want to thank Bill Masoulis and Dirk de Bruyn for putting the show on. Fantastic effort, and it's a great privilege to be back once again in Melbourne, a city that I lived in from 1972 to 1999, and formed much of my personality. And certainly my creative development as a filmmaker and a writer and so on. And it's great to see so many of my cherished friends and filmmaker and musician supporters here tonight. And I will not say much really, except to say that now that I have returned, it's my intention to come back on a regular basis and to continue working here and to build stronger bonds between this city and San Francisco, where I live with my wife Molly Hankwitz, and to further reinforce the bonds between San Francisco and Melbourne with new productions, which pick up where the films you'll see tonight leave off. Because to me it's a continuum, it's a process. And you know, you don't ever stop doing, if you do what we do, you never stop, you can't. It's just in the blood, you know, you just have to keep doing it. So my instinct is just to keep building on this stuff and reinforcing the ties and just making it bigger, bolder, better, with more of the same, so that the same message gets amplified louder and louder, and making sure everyone who is on board, you know, can have the opportunity to help grow those kind of political, audiovisual messages and adventures. And I work in rhetoric, I work in anecdote, I work in allegory, and as the films play, you know, I hope you can find some connecting threads. All right? So thanks again, Bill.
Roll the films. So Dave's going to he's going to guide us through a couple of the sections of the films.
Yeah, so I think we'll start off with the Super 8 bit, and while that plays, I'll do a bit of an intro with the Super 8. So if we can hit play, we'll get it going.
To sign forces us to see an object for its significance. If you've got a comment, make it.
The solemn accountants are jumping ship, sir. All of them, sir, in the last skimpy surplus, sir. Room for one more outside, sir, they said. And plunged 7th teenage future Molotov cocktails. Last seen swimming desperately in sewage. Allies wait on knives. Valiant crowns do a short 22 and heavy commitments. The Caribbean swells to a roar. A Negro snapped the advantages. Our show went on, we're proud of it.
And Molly.
And Molly.
That relates to one of the, I could start in a lot of different places in this, because there's all these technologies you move through. But
Just hold on.
Yeah,
It's a
okay.
weak mic.
It's
Okay.
actually a good mic.
I mean, there's a lot of things that have been moved through, but the thing, because we mentioned Molly before, I mean, the thing that I really wanted to get to was, you know, when the two of you started working together, all of a sudden, it seems to be about this relationship that moves in and out of technology and through technology, and it seems to have had a big impact on your trajectory.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it comes and goes, and it's obsolete the minute you open it. So the best thing to think about it is not to worry about use-by dates. I teach history of design at San Francisco State School of Design, and when I talk about the origins of modernity and technology, it's obvious that no one technology has the lion's share or monopoly on contemporaneity. Everything's obsolete eventually, but things rhyme historically, right? So we're doing the Urban Technology Toolkit because one problem at that time was the cops stealing your footage. So if you went out to a demo, the cops would just take your camcorder. But if the camcorder was separate from the camera itself and you were streaming, they could take your camera but not get the footage, right? So now streaming is a common idea and we're familiar with it. But this idea of that kind of separation was intriguing in and of itself. And then you combine it with situationist ideas like the drift. So we were just experimenting with that because it was part of an idea at the time called tactical media in the early 90s, where part of political activity was to look for ways to leverage technology to help with the process of contesting, gentrification, the closing down of possibility in cities. And from what I can see of Melbourne, the working class have had to move further and further out, like a dartboard into the outer regions. So if you're a new arrival now, you don't end up in the centre, you end up in the periphery. So, these kind of things about urbanisms, architecture, technology, it's all of a piece. There's no one tech that you can focus on. You've got to look at the totality.
And you've always been chasing that horizon. But my point was too is that it seemed to shift, where in that relationship in terms of it became more about your body rather than your relationship with the landscape. Another thing that I wanted to get to at the start is, the whole migrant thing. You migrated to Australia, but you also spent some time in the States as as part of your family before you came to Australia. Would you like to say a few things about that and the way that influenced, your whole trajectory about where you came from in terms of political stuff?
Yeah, I had a very extraordinary dad, and he was a very, very open-minded guy and was very savvy with cameras and lenses, and he understood the connection between media and what you could do with media, photography, in order to extend your possibilities as an individual beyond the boundaries set by you by class. So he knew that if you were able to take cameras and lenses and photograph the right thing, you could transform your life. And he taught me how to do that, how to leverage media to sort of navigate your way beyond the confines of your own limits, and he taught me a few secrets how to do that. And
but it's also about an attitude, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. It's about not allowing yourself to get defined by the constraints set for you, and that includes migration. So when he had the opportunity to move to California, he took it, whereas a lot of people in England wouldn't have.
How old were you when that happened?
I was 6, so at the age of 6 I got to live in California and live the life of little California, and then we came back to England and then we moved to Australia. So by the time I got to St Kilda, I was already experienced living as a Californian. So it felt a bit like California to me, but with a very sort of colonial British feel to it.
But it was also about being a politically active Californian too, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, you couldn't live in San Diego at the height of the Vietnam War, with lefty parents and not be kind of immersed in that. Plus, the popular culture was just, it infused you. I mean, Zabriskie Point, Antonioni, Jimi Hendrix, my brother Richard is here in the audience tonight. He turned me on to, the counterculture aspects of music. Hey, Richard. Yes, Pink Floyd, all of that. So by the time I was like 9, we got to, I was completely immersed in countercultural concepts. and I was able to adapt that to my life here in Australia. And it was a dynamic place. Whitlam, Gough Whitlam, socialism. I mean, Australia was a socialist country in 1972. Most people thought in a socialist way here.
Right. So that maybe brings us back to Onus on Us, you know. I mean, the thing that I remember about that, you know, you're driving around in your mini moke all around Melbourne, and you're going from one person to another and asking those questions, some of which we saw there. But the thing that got me about that is that, I mean, you always had to travel for about 20 minutes in your mini moke to get from one person to another. You know, it wasn't like it was all sort of concentrated on one block in Carlton or anything like that.
Yeah, you know, but I mean, you know, gasoline wasn't super expensive, and mini mokes don't use a lot of it, and Super 8 was cheap, and you know, you could just point the camera out the window, and there were a few of us doing that kind of thing. You know, you go see John Cumming, go see you, go see Joe Hampton, go see Sarah. You know, we'd all do something like that. We all had cameras, and we all were filming something. And of course, we'd all gather at the Super 8 film night or someone's house and show. Like, that was the lifestyle. Film was the lifestyle. Cantrell's Film Notes was the kind of adhesive that bonded it, or the Melbourne Super 8 Film Group newsletter was another thing, or, you know, Film News magazine, or at Rusden, you know, we had Graham Cutts and all that, and he had
that's another thing worth maybe talking about, is about your whole insertion into Rusden in a sort of precarious kind of way.
Yeah, well, my brother Paul had gone to Rusden, and he kept coming home with all this amazing film gear. And by the time I'd finished high school, I was fully conversant in how to load Baileyus and Bolexes, and I knew what depth of field was, and not that I hadn't understood that from my dad, but with still cameras, because he taught photography at Brown High School and built the darkroom there in '75. You know, and so I had almost a complete Rusden Film School education before I even signed up there. Because I knew all their film equipment from my brother bringing it home and showing me how to use it. And I used to go to Graham Cutts' experimental film classes by wagging school. So instead of going to, like, you know, PE at, you know, Form 5 Cheltenham High School, I'd go with my brother to go and watch, you know, Stan Brakhage and all that.
Yeah, great. There's all these shifts in technology, you know, going from one thing to another. So can you say a little bit about why, you know, how you decided to shift from one way of working with different things to another? I mean, some of that comes through, you know, you working with Molly, that there's sort of a relationship thing there that starts to come through in the types of material you start to produce, but also the technologies that you're using and collecting and shaping. But, you know, just a general thing, because I mean, one of the things that, for me, that interesting in looking at over the whole trajectory is that there are these sort of locus points, you know, over time, and you shift with them, you know, even the whole idea about, you know, coming up with Puppenhead or going through Other Zone, or then kind of doing how did you decide, or what was it that made you kind of work and to shift your own folks to stay ahead of the game, if you like?
Okay, well, the common theme throughout all of it is sort of exile and being under scrutiny by authority. You know, there's always some guy behind the wall who's out to kind of watch what you're doing. You know, it's paranoia, really. It's like, so the sense that you've got to keep moving. You know, there's, you know, precarity, I guess it is. You know, like you might have to pack up and keep moving. But also, like, what you're doing might be kind of a bit dodgy, and you might have to kind of, you know, there's that. But also, a common theme is also remediation, because if you connect 80s, 90s, and now, and even in the future with like AI, like that, you know, this idea for Other Zone, the series, you know, if you take Other Zone and sort of pump it full of steroids and then, you know, put it on streaming media, you take the same idea. You know, it's the same thing, but you just inflate it bigger and bigger. You know, it's remediation. You know, it covers VR, it covers culture jamming, it covers recycling 16 mil. You know, you take it and you recycle it, or even objects. You know, you build an environment and you enter the environment. Like I saw Avatar 2 last night, and that's like being in an aquarium. You know, you don't so much watch a film as you dive into an aquarium and you swim around and then you come out again. I mean, the dialogue's like a high school play, but you're definitely in there with those fish and those dinosaurs and that, you know, and it's for that reason alone it's worth diving in, you know. So remediating things, you know, like if you find something on the ground, you can put it on the shelf, but you can also scan it and make 1 million of them and then, you know, enter them like a world. So it's a new time.
Good. I mean, I can see that. I mean, the way you're talking about connecting these things, but then, you know, using the word remediation, and that's the kind of word that wasn't there, you know, when you started working with Super 8. So I kind of find that you do find ways of recontextualising these different layers of technology. And you think that we're in a point now where, because of this history of technology, and there's traces of it in all your work, it now can get reconstituted in a way that really, you know, has to do with where we are now?
Yeah, you know, I've also tried to be, you know, you work in film, it's you know, it's a piecemeal thing. Jigar Veritov built his films up from fragments, and, you know, he had a very piecemeal constructivist method. You know, he didn't separate film from life, you know, and that's the key. The key is not to think of film as an artifact ready for sale, although it can be that. In fact, we've got copies of Other Zone for sale for $10 tonight, by the way. But also to think of it as, like, you know, your keys, your handbag, your shoes. It's just there. It's part of your life. And if you have the right, it's like if they're the right combination, some locks are open. You know, Puppethead was deliberately made through the Swinburne method. It's a Swinburne film. When you go to Swinburne, you make a film that looks like a Swinburne film. You know,
but that's kind of interesting though, because it's like at some point you decided, okay, that's next. You know,
yeah.
Now I'm going to go to Swinburne. I'm going to get myself in there, and then I'm going to do this, this, and this.
Yeah.
You kind of never. You always had a strategy or a way of, you know, working through those things. Which, and then you mentioned it before, that whole situationist thing and the derive. That seems to be at the heart of some of your creative kind of thinking. You know, about how you're going to move into the future.
Yeah, well, when Adrian Martin saw what I'd been writing in the Super 8 Film Group newsletter, and then read about, he was in Sydney at the time, read about Onus on Us, he said, this guy's a situationist without knowing it. So I then said, okay, I'm now going to immerse myself in Guy Debord and the SI and all that. So I did that, and then I just sort of reverse engineered that and said, well, what the SI were trying to do was sort of reverse engineer the problem of alienation in France post-war, which was that the Marshall Plan had basically destroyed their idea of France. Their idea of France was like what it was before the Germans got there, which was cafes and brothels and smoking and wandering around and all that, right? Which was great. But when the Germans got there, they crushed that. And then when the Americans got there, they just added white goods and advertising, you know. So it was a double invasion. So their response was, fuck advertising, fuck all that, we're totally alienated, we're going to kind of directly attack that. So the SI approach was to contest it head on and say, well, I feel alienated by all these white goods and ads, and, you know, it's like the film They Live. Do you feel that way too? And some people would go, fuck you, I don't have to answer that. You know, how dare you make me confront my own alienation? And then other people would go, you know what? Yeah, I do actually. I don't really like having to have, I don't like Brunswick Street now, because it's the only way I can relate to anyone is through swiping a card, you know. And the only thing that most people in inner city Melbourne care about now is my credit limit. And they used to care about what I did last night or what movies I'd seen. If I go somewhere now, they just want to know if I've got the right credit card and if I can pay for like a $15 beer.
Yeah, well, that's, you know, I mean, you predicted that future.
Well, I didn't predict anything. I didn't predict anything. That's the nature of the capitalist mindset.
Yeah, well, let's go back even a little bit further into your youth in England, what that was like in terms of where you lived and the sort of technology that was involved in that part of your life.
Well, you know, we had a modest, you know, it was comfortable. We lived in the Midlands. You know, my dad and mum were, you know, it wasn't what you call a grand lifestyle, but we got by. We had a strong family. You know, it was a working class, lower middle class family. Very strong family ties, very warm, you know, weekends with the family, lots of playing pool and watching TV, and you know, I have very, very fond memories of my dad's side of the family, and the sense of community you have if you grow up in Birmingham at that time. The post-war years were fraught though, because the war had brought a lot of destruction to the industrial parts of England, and I don't think it ever really recovered actually, because by the 80s Thatcher had completely gutted the entire industrial region. You know, that song by the Specials, We're Living in a Ghost Town. If you listen to that, that's exactly what Birmingham was like in about 87. You drive through, I'd visit my granddad, and every other shop was boarded up. And, you know, that kind of decline began, I'd say, in about 1972, just as we left. So my dad was right on the money to leave at that time. You know, so, you know, respect to him for that. But yeah, I mean, you know, rationing had just ended, so you couldn't get really much. I grew up on like fish fingers and tin food, but also the media was amazing. We had great TV, BBC One, BBC Two, Nigel Neal, Quatermass and the Pit, Terry Nation, Doctor Who, you know, fantastic popular culture, T-Rex. Gary Glitter, I know he got discredited, but yeah, you know, glam rock, and then Yes, Pink Floyd. You know, I mean, you couldn't be more saturated in more garish, over-the-top, excessive, immersive psychedelia. Paradise, man.
Yeah, good. I think I've asked enough questions. I've kind of tried to get Dave to talk about kind of this whole history of technology and where he stood inside it, and he's come through strong on that, which are very, you know, very interesting. I think, you know, because things are changing all the time. But is there any questions from the audience? There's a line. I can see a hand up there.
Yep.
There you go.
It's John Powell.
John, yeah.
Dave, I noticed that the Zeppelin lingers to the sort of almost to the last frame, which I really love. Aside from them being beautifully cinematic, just sitting here, it occurred to me that it's kind of like an emblem for your use of counterfactuals or you know, parallel histories or futures that never were.
Yeah.
Like, I see that as a rhetorical tactic that keeps on rolling. You explicitly said that's what Puffenhead was, right? So, do you care to speak to that?
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, with if I was, you know, the thing that's interests me now is the great conflicts that are going on now in the world seem to be between the fossil fuel extractors, you know, let's say Russia, China, extraction mindset, long-term, pull it out of the earth at all costs, versus, you know, I call them the megaclept, for want of a better phrase, you know, and then you've got the kind of Google, Facebook, neoliberal, Nancy Pelosi kind of, you know, swipe card, we don't care if it's corrupt, just keep us, you know, everything that Julian Assange exposed and is embarrassing to the powers. That's the kind of bourgeoisie world that we kind of turn a blind eye to the horrors of, but put up with. And then the third group is everybody else, right? The people left out, you know, the people in the, what Zizek calls the homo sacer, the non-people, you know, the refugees, the people who live in the mega slums, you know.
The precariat. The
precariat, right?
Yeah.
So if we can cartoonize the three blocks in the world, Other Zone, the series, would be about them contesting. And Zhang all the heroes of Other Zone would be in the third group against the other two, right? So the airship as an emblem is always linked to imperialism, right? If you, like von Hindenburg, when he made the airships, he didn't like the Nazis co-opting that. He didn't want that. So the Hindenburg flew to New York at least, I think, many, many times before it blew up. So in Puppethead, when he's traveling on the Hindenburg, that was quite a routine flight. But now you think about airships, they're a solar punk answer to a housing problem. They could be a solar punk answer to a transport problem. They're quite a utopian idea. So I put them in because, you know, I've been getting shots of Melbourne where I keep tilting up in the hope of putting in airships. And, you know, I've also got, I saw Avatar 2, and God damn, they put an ecranoplan in there. I was going to put fleets of ecranoplans in my next one, you know, but I can still do that. Also, my favourite band in Melbourne is the Ecranoplans, and they're right here in the but you know what I'm saying? Like, the mega craft look awesome on film, especially if they're blowing up and crashing, like they do in, you know, the best films these days. So it's all about the visuals. But yeah, I mean, solar punk is the way to go. I mean, you can do an awful lot with a few Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and some Python code, and you don't have to pull out, you know, 10 football fields of coal or oil to do the same thing.
How much time have we got? Okay.
5 minutes.
Yeah, well, another question. Simon up here.
I've got a question. Cut off the microphone.
Oh yeah, go for it, mate.
So you know when you make a film, they say that if there's a shotgun hanging on the mantelpiece, you better use it before the film ends.
Yeah.
And all those films with Zeppelins in, if you have a Zeppelin in the film,
Yeah.
does it have to explode before the end of the film? Is that compulsory or not?
That's a good question. It's a good question. Does it have to explode? I don't think so. No,
Because
I
it's
think
false. It's not, that doesn't happen. Actually, planes are a lot more dangerous than Zeppelins. Bit of a hobby horse here.
Yeah, I think if you there's an old rule that if you show a gun in a film, it needs to go off by the third reel. Yeah, I believe in that. Yeah, I don't think if you show, you know, guns need to go off in films if you're going to show them. Otherwise, what's the point? Because they're potential energy, right?
Yeah, but Zeppelins not so much.
Zeppelins, the only reason you associate airships with explosions is because of the Hindenburg.
I know. It
But
fucks
most
me
of the
up,
time
man.
they didn't blow up.
Yeah, I know. It
Yeah.
really gives me the shit.
But airships now can be, you know, airships now and in the future, I think, could be I imagine them kind of like blisters around the bases, like in that AI thing, blisters around the bases of existing structures that are semi-solve housing problem. Because the biggest problem in Melbourne now and San Francisco is housing, right? Which is why everyone's pushed out to Nunawading and Werribee and between Melbourne and Geelong. And in others on the series, I want to build on the screen space elevator connecting to a ring around the Earth, so that San Francisco and Melbourne both have space elevators. And the ring is a new structure, and then more moon bases on the moon, and then black holes and stars in the distance where all the intelligence comes from.
Fantastic, man.
But the airships could be, you know, if you imagine them stuck like the way mushrooms cluster around the base of a tree, and then maybe they peel off and float away or something like that. But yeah, airships just in Melbourne and Brisbane, those sail things that are stretched between wires, I love that. Imagine there's solar panels. Imagine buildings are solar panels. You just rethink the whole relationship between people, buildings, energy, vehicles, and in 70 years, Melbourne will be very different, because the reliance upon transport, dwelling, infrastructure will be forced to change that way. Because otherwise it's an extractive exchange that invites invasion.
I don't know, man.
In a Ukraine model.
Yeah. But all this talk of massive fucking rings and space towers and Zeppelins, I just think this like Freudianism has gone out of control, man.
Hell, man, I grew up in post-war Europe. It's Freud all the way.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
So did
Good
you.
luck with the future, everybody. All right.
So, another hand? Can I see another hand? Another hand? I can't say. I'm surprised.
Can we have beer now?
I've got a lot more questions.
Anyway, I've got, okay.
I just want to ask one more thing, just about you and Molly. You know, I think she deserves a bit of applause for a start. You know. But I have a question too, which kind of is the other side of the question I asked David, and that is like, you know, your collaboration. How has it, you know, transformed? How has it been transformative in terms of both your art? You know, because I get there's these two bodies and there's this stuff flying between them, this technology flying between them.
Well, one doesn't know David Cox without going on a major adventure, let's put it that way. And so it's been amazing. A very creative person from the minute I met him. Was kind of like that. And in San Francisco, a different voice around our scene, around other cinema. He put on this great screening, and they were just points of identification the night that he first showed his films around the space modulator. And so we've just kind of expanded from there. But and David has pushed me a lot, actually, from certain shyness that I have about creativity. He's pushed me to, you know, with my skills and gotten things out of me.
But you've pushed him too.
Maybe, I don't know. When we were all the miniature things that we got into around 2000, it was just in the air, like these shrinking tools. You know, miniaturization had become something that was saturating the tech. You know, so everything we did with the Urban's Technology Toolkit, for example, was all off the shelf. I mean, anyone could have put that same kit together. We just fetishized it and made a movie about it and practiced with it. And it was so much fun, you know, to explore and just try it out and, you know, make it this world's tiniest, you know, just because of the ridiculousness of it in a way, you know, it was just fun. So
this sort of creativity, technological kind of mix, I mean, you know, that's had an impact too on your son. I mean,
that drone belongs to Simon.
Okay.
he had to get the drone. Yes, he likes drone. He wanted to buy a drone. So that's kind of our next project, is to explore the drone a little bit, drone things. Simon, our son, he was going to come with us. I guess, he's a tech. You'd say that, yes. Simon's definitely into tech.
Big time.
He's one of these new, but a lot of this, you know, he's one of these new, he's a college student, so everything comes through the phone. You know, it's kind of the new way to learn and to grope the world is through your phone now. So I think, at least in the States, it's very much a part of education, the way students learn things and do things.
I've had the unfortunate, I understand, you know, the education system has its flaws. Let's leave it at that. But you want to finish with anything?
Yeah, I just want to remind folks, we have some content. I have very few books because I couldn't carry that many, but Sign Wars, The Culture Jammers Strike Back, if you want a copy of that, I've got a couple of these, or three of these. My novella, Dr. Yes and the Mystery of the Mission, which is a rather fantastical detective story set in the Mission District of San Francisco, involving giant monsters who do battle in the Mission District. And of course the cyberpunk epic you saw before, The Scarf Was the Key to Freedom, which I'm hoping to expand into a bigger, longer, more, even more ambitious and ludicrous production coming up with the help of the producer Sarah Zardair, who's in the audience. Hey, Sarah. If you want a copy of this, $10 and signed. Okay, but that's it from me. Thanks.
Thanks, David Cox, Molly Hankwitz.
Thank you.